In the heart of a desolate forest, far away from the noise of the world, Jack thought he had found peace. But when he hears a soft cry in the cold night, his life is turned upside down. What begins as a simple act of kindness soon spirals into a terrifying journey that forces Jack to face a chilling truth. The wolves he's helped are no ordinary creatures. They are cursed souls trapped in eternal winter, yearning for freedom. The more he learns, the deeper the bond grows, until Jack realizes that his fate is now tied to theirs. When the wolves beg him to break their curse, Jack is thrust into a dark ritual where the price of salvation is his very soul. To save them, he must sacrifice everything he has ever known: his warmth, his humanity, his very existence. But the wolves are not just beasts. They were once men, bound by a pact long forgotten, and only Jack's compassion can free them. Will he choose to save them knowing the cost? Or will he let them remain trapped in their frozen curse forever? A heart-wrenching tale of sacrifice, redemption, and the price of breaking a curse. Jack had always loved the quiet of the wilderness. The solitude had a way of healing him, mending the parts of his soul that the city's chaotic pace had worn down. The constant hum of life, car engines, bustling streets, people talking, sirens in the distance, was something Jack had left behind when he moved into the small cabin nestled at the edge of the forest. There was something peaceful about living so far from civilization. The vast, untouched woods stretched endlessly in every direction, and the world outside his cabin door felt like it was a distant memory. The cabin itself was modest, built by Jack himself when he first moved up north years ago. It had a simple stone fireplace, a wooden floor that creaked when he walked on it, and just enough space to be comfortable without being overwhelming. The isolation suited him. It gave him the time to reflect, to write, to create. Jack was a writer, and the woods had always been his muse. But tonight was different. The winds were howling through the trees, an eerie, almost mournful sound. Jack sat by the fire, watching the flames flicker, and listened. It was cold, bitterly so, and the chill seemed to seep into the bones of the cabin itself. The air outside was so cold that his breath came out in visible puffs when he ventured to the window to look out at the night. He had been on a short hike earlier, and the wilderness had seemed almost alive with the harsh winds and the occasional rustling of branches. He had felt a strange sense of foreboding even then, as if something was watching him, following him. But he had chalked it up to the isolation getting to him, perhaps a little too much time in his own head. The sound of a soft whine, almost like a distant howl, broke his train of thought. It was strange, a noise he hadn't heard before. At first he thought it might be an animal, perhaps a wolf or a coyote. But there was something unsettling about it, something that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He frowned, trying to discern what it was. The whine was faint, but it seemed to be coming from the direction of the woods, just beyond the trees that lined the clearing around his cabin. The wind whistled through the branches, but the sound was unmistakable, a soft, pleading cry, not the usual sounds of nature he was familiar with. Jack hesitated for a moment, sitting in the stillness, listening intently. His instincts told him to ignore it, to stay safe inside where it was warm, but curiosity gnawed at him. He had always been drawn to the unknown, to things that didn't quite make sense. The strange noise seemed to call to him, and against his better judgment, he stood up. He grabbed his thick coat from the hook by the door, pulled on his gloves and stuffed his feet into his worn boots. The wind greeted him immediately when he stepped outside. It cut through his clothing, biting into his skin with an intensity that made his teeth clench. The trees around him swayed in the storm's force, their dark branches reaching toward the sky like twisted fingers. The moon hung high, a faint light in the pitch-black sky, casting long eerie shadows across the clearing. The snow crunched beneath his boots as he made his way across the ground, each step leaving a deep indentation in the fresh snow. He pulled the collar of his coat higher against his face, trying to shield himself from the cold. The whine had stopped, but Jack's gut told him to keep moving. He had to find the source of that sound. The forest was dense here, with towering pines and thick underbrush that made it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. Jack's breath was visible in front of him as he trudged forward, the cold seeping into his bones despite the layers of clothing. The moonlight filtered through the trees, casting pale light on the snow-covered ground, but it only made the shadows seem deeper, darker. He walked for what felt like an eternity, the silence only broken by the occasional gust of wind. He was beginning to doubt his decision to venture out. His instincts told him to turn back, that this was a fool's errand, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, something waiting. And then there it was again, the whine. Louder this time. Clear. Jack froze in place, his heart racing. It was coming from the direction ahead of him. He took a cautious step forward, his eyes straining to see anything in the dark. The wind howled again, louder this time, and as Jack peered through the trees he saw them. Glowing eyes reflecting the faint moonlight. At first he thought they were just the gleam of water on a patch of ice, but as he got closer he realized they were the eyes of animals. Wolves he thought at first, but something felt off. These eyes weren't the typical yellow or amber of wolves he'd seen in the area. They glowed an unnatural shade of blue, and they seemed to pierce the night itself, watching him. The wolves, or whatever they were, stood in the clearing ahead. They were huddled together in a circle, their fur matted with snow and ice, their bodies stiff and unmoving. Jack felt a chill run down his spine, and for the first time he felt a deep sense of dread that he couldn't explain. The wolves' eyes never left him, their gaze so intense it felt like they were reading his very thoughts. He took a step forward, his heart pounding in his chest. The lead wolf, a massive creature with white fur and glowing blue eyes, slowly began to move toward him. It took a few hesitant steps, then another, until it was standing just a few feet away. Jack's breath caught in his throat. He could feel the wolf's gaze on him, its eyes filled with an intelligence far beyond what he had ever expected from an animal. It was as though it knew him, knew his every thought. And then, to Jack's utter shock, the wolf spoke. "Please, enter the house." The words were soft but clear. Jack blinked, his mind reeling. His feet felt like they were rooted to the ground, and he stared at the wolf, unable to comprehend what he had just heard. Leave the house, before it's too late," the wolf repeated, its voice more insistent this time. Jack's mouth went dry. He took a step back, his heart racing in his chest. Wolves didn't speak. This wasn't possible. He must have imagined it, this couldn't be real. But the wolf's eyes, filled with a deep sorrow, told him otherwise. I don't understand," Jack stammered. "What do you mean?" Jack's heart raced in his chest, the cold air biting at his skin as the wolf's words echoed in his mind. He stumbled back a step, instinctively looking over his shoulder as if there were someone else in the forest who could confirm what he'd just heard. But it was just him and the wolves, alone in the vast wilderness. His breath came out in shallow bursts, fogging in the frigid air. The wolf's eyes remained fixed on him, glowing with an intensity that sent a shiver through his entire body. There was something unnatural in those eyes. They weren't the amber hues of the wild creatures he was familiar with. No, these eyes seemed to hold centuries of sorrow, of desperation. "Please, enter the house," the wolf repeated, a tremor in its voice. Jack's mind raced. This wasn't possible. Wolves didn't speak. The cold was getting to him, playing tricks on his mind. Or maybe he was still half dreaming. But as he stood frozen in place, the wolf's eyes never wavered, locking onto his with a hunger that wasn't of a typical animal. It was as if the creature was pleading with him, begging him to understand something he could barely begin to comprehend. The snow around the pack crunched softly as one of the other wolves stirred, its movements slow and labored. They were in bad shape. Their bodies seemed to be frozen in place, their fur coated in layers of frost. Jack could feel a knot tighten in his stomach. Something about this didn't sit right with him. He had never seen wolves in such a state before, especially not like this. The alpha wolf took another step toward him, its legs shaky as if it had not moved in days. The other wolves remained huddled together in a tight cluster, their eyes staring blankly ahead, motionless. The scene was haunting, more so now that he understood it wasn't just physical suffering. There was something far darker at play here. "What's happening to you?" Jack asked, his voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might break the fragile spell that seemed to surround them. "Why are you like this?" The alpha wolf's ears flicked toward him, then it took another unsteady step, closing the distance between them. Its body quivered, but its eyes never left Jack's. Then, with a voice that sounded more like a strained growl than speech, it spoke again. "We were cursed," the wolf rasped, its voice hoarse, full of grief. "Long ago we made a pact, a bargain for power and strength. But it was a lie. The power was not what we thought it would be. And now we are trapped, frozen in this form, bound by a curse we cannot break on our own." Jack swallowed hard, his throat dry. He wanted to laugh, to dismiss this as some sort of hallucination brought on by the cold. But the way the wolf looked at him, the way it seemed to speak from deep within its chest, with a voice full of regret and despair, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't a trick. The pack stirred again, a low, collective sound like a sigh coming from the wolves. They were suffering. Jack could see it in their eyes. "What do you need from me?" Jack asked cautiously. He had to be careful. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat resonating louder in his ears. The wind howled in the distance, but here in this clearing, there was a deafening silence. It was like time had stopped. "Your warmth," the alpha wolf whispered. "Your life. You must bring us into your home. It is the only place where we can heal. The curse, only with your help can it be lifted. But it is dangerous. You must come with us." Jack's mind was reeling. He had always prided himself on being rational, on understanding the world in concrete terms. But this didn't fit into any logical framework he had ever known. Wolves didn't talk. They didn't beg. They didn't plead for salvation. Still, he couldn't ignore the aching sadness in their eyes. He could see the torment etched into their faces, their bodies half frozen as they fought to survive. The entire scene felt like a waking nightmare, one that he couldn't quite wake up from. Jack stepped forward hesitantly, his eyes shifting from the alpha wolf to the rest of the pack. They lay still, but their eyes followed him, watching every movement. The alpha took another shaky step, then let out a soft, painful whine that pierced the cold air. The sound was more than just an animal's cry. It was the sound of desperation, the kind of desperation that seemed to reach into his very soul. "Please," the wolf whispered again. "Before it's too late." Jack's breath caught in his throat. He knew deep down that something terrible was about to unfold. But the wolves, these creatures that had once been men, needed him. They had no other option. He wasn't sure how he knew it, but he felt it in every fiber of his being. He didn't know how long he stood there, lost in thought, his mind spinning. But eventually his feet began to move. Slowly, hesitantly, he took a step forward. And then another. "All right," Jack murmured, his voice barely audible over the wind. "I'll help you." The moment the words left his mouth, the atmosphere around him seemed to change. The wind, which had been howling relentlessly, seemed to calm. The air around them felt colder than ever, but it wasn't the biting chill of the night. It felt like the coldness of the forest had seeped deep into his bones, as though he were stepping into something far darker than the wilderness itself. The alpha wolf nodded, a slight movement that seemed to signal some kind of relief. It turned, its body trembling, and started to walk away from the clearing. The other wolves followed, their movements slow and painful, but they stayed close to one another as if drawing strength from the pack. Jack hesitated for a moment, looking back at his cabin in the distance. He had no idea what was happening or why these wolves had singled him out. But he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't turn his back on them now. Something in their eyes told him that there was more to this than just a simple act of kindness. Whatever this curse was, it was not something he could ignore. He followed them through the snow, his steps growing more uncertain as the night deepened. The pack was silent now, save for the sound of their slow, deliberate movements. The wolves were closer than he had expected, each step bringing them nearer to his cabin, the place that had been his sanctuary for so long. As they reached the edge of the forest, Jack paused. The wolves, their fur matted with snow and ice, stopped as well, staring at the door of his cabin. The alpha turned to him, its eyes still glowing with that unnatural blue light. "You must bring us inside," it said softly, almost pleading. "We cannot stay out here any longer." Jack nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. With one last lingering look at the wolves, he stepped forward and reached for the door of his cabin. The moment the door creaked open, a strange energy seemed to fill the air. The temperature dropped even further, and the shadows in the cabin grew longer, deeper. Jack felt a rush of unease but pushed it aside, stepping back to allow the pack inside. One by one the wolves entered the cabin, their eyes still locked on him as if they were waiting for something, waiting for him to make the next move. The air inside was colder now, and Jack felt a chill run through him as soon as he stepped over the threshold. The alpha wolf stood still near the door, its head low as it watched him. Jack closed the door slowly, his mind racing. What had he just done? Why had he brought these wolves into his home? But the answer seemed to be there, right in front of him, in those eyes that filled him with a sense of urgency. The pack was no longer making any noise. They were still, their gazes heavy, their bodies tense as if they were waiting for something to happen. Jack could feel the weight of it all, their curse, their pain, and now his own fate intertwined with theirs. It was as if the entire world had shifted and there was no going back. He didn't know it yet, but that one decision, inviting the wolves into his cabin, was the beginning of something far darker than he could have ever imagined. The wolf's eyes flickered with something like frustration and it growled softly. "We have been trapped," it said, its voice barely a whisper now. "Frozen in the curse. We need you. You are our last hope." Jack's mind swam with confusion. This couldn't be real. He had to be dreaming. There was no way this was happening. But the air around him felt cold, impossibly cold, as if something unnatural had settled into the very atmosphere. His breath was visible, hanging in front of him like a cloud of smoke, and he could see the frost forming on the branches of nearby trees. The temperature had dropped so suddenly that it felt like the world itself had frozen. The wolf moved closer, its massive form looming over Jack. Its eyes never left his. "Please," it said again, "the house. You must bring us warmth. You are the only one who can help us." The words resonated deep in Jack's chest, a strange pull he couldn't explain. He knew he should be terrified. Everything about this situation screamed danger, screamed that he should turn around and run. But something held him in place. Something about those eyes, the urgency in the wolf's voice, made him take a deep breath and nod. "All right," Jack said, his voice shaky but resolute. "I'll help. I'll bring you to the house." The wolf seemed to relax slightly, its tense body softening as it turned away. It led Jack through the trees back toward the cabin. Jack followed closely, his mind racing with questions, but none of them had answers. He had never felt more unsure of anything in his life. When they reached the cabin, the wolves stood silently in the clearing, watching him. Jack took one last look at them before stepping inside, the warmth of the fire welcoming him as he closed the door behind him. But the warmth was fleeting. As soon as the wolves entered the cabin, the temperature plummeted again. It felt as though the cold had seeped into the walls, into the very air. Jack shivered as his breath became visible once more, and he quickly realized that the warmth from the fire was no longer enough. The wolves stood around him in silence, their eyes still locked onto his. Jack could feel the weight of their gaze, and he knew something far deeper was at play here. Something that would change everything. And just as he was about to speak, the alpha wolf stepped forward, its voice a low growl. "You don't know what you've done," it said, its words carrying a heavy, ominous weight. "But now you're part of it." The door creaked as Jack opened it, the hinges protesting the cold, as though even the house itself was reluctant to let them in. He hesitated for a moment, his hands still gripping the doorknob, his heart pounding. The wind howled behind him, but inside the cabin the air was eerily still, almost too still. The wolves waited, standing in a tight cluster just outside the door, their glowing blue eyes fixed on him, almost pleading. Their bodies were stiff, their fur matted and coated with ice and snow. They looked like shadows cast from some forgotten nightmare, yet Jack couldn't bring himself to turn them away. There was something about them, something ancient and desperate, that gnawed at him. The alpha wolf, still standing in front, took a step closer to Jack, its massive body blocking the light from outside. Its eyes seemed to flicker with a strange mixture of hope and fear. The air around them felt charged, like a storm was about to break. Jack took a deep breath and stepped back, opening the door wider. The wolves wasted no time. The first one entered, moving swiftly and with purpose, its paws soundless on the wooden floor. The others followed, one by one, their eyes never leaving Jack, as if watching his every move. He stood there rooted to the spot as they filled his small cabin, their presence overwhelming. The alpha wolf was the last to step inside. As it entered, the temperature inside the cabin plummeted, colder than the night outside. A thick layer of frost spread across the windows, and Jack could feel his breath condensing in the air. His fire, which had been crackling warmly just moments before, sputtered and died as if the wolves had drained it of life. Jack looked around the room, feeling an icy heaviness settle into the walls. The wolves, still silent, had grouped themselves in a circle around the fireplace, their eyes now fixed on him, waiting for something. A shiver ran down his spine. The atmosphere felt wrong, like the air itself was thick with some ancient magic that he didn't understand. The alpha wolf, its fur as white as the snow outside, approached Jack slowly. There was something regal about its movements, something that made it appear far more than just an ordinary wolf. It seemed to tower over him, its gaze unwavering, its eyes glowing with that same unnatural blue light. Jack's breath caught in his throat, and for a moment, he almost feared it might speak again. And then it did. "We are cursed," the wolf rasped, its voice low but clear. "We cannot stay here long. The curse will grow stronger and soon we will be beyond saving." Jack's mouth went dry. He had heard this before, but hearing it again from the wolf's mouth made it all the more real. The idea that these creatures weren't just lost animals, but something else entirely, a creature of legend perhaps, seemed more and more likely with every passing second. "What do you need from me?" Jack's voice was shaky, his hands trembling as he gripped the edge of the table, feeling the coldness seep into the wood. "We need warmth," the alpha wolf replied, its voice filled with a painful urgency. "We need the fire, the life within your home. You must keep us alive until the curse is lifted. We are bound to this form until someone like you can break it." Jack felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He didn't understand. He didn't know how he could help or why he had been chosen. But looking at the pack, each wolf staring at him with that desperate, haunted look, it was impossible to deny that they needed him. And deep down he knew he couldn't turn them away. "How do I break it?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The alpha wolf lowered its head slightly, its gaze softening. "You must bring us the warmth we need," it said, its voice quieter now, filled with sorrow. "Only by rekindling the fire within your soul can you break the curse. But be warned, the path is dangerous. The curse cannot be undone easily." Jack furrowed his brow, confusion clouding his mind. "Rekindling the fire within my soul?" The wolf gave a low, rumbling growl, more of a sound of frustration than anything else. "The warmth of a human heart. The connection that binds you to this world. You must give us what we need, your spirit. Only then can we be free of the curse." Jack took a step back, his pulse quickening. "My spirit? What do you mean by that?" The alpha wolf's eyes locked onto his with such intensity that Jack could hardly look away. "The curse was placed long ago by those who sought power beyond their control. We were once humans long ago, but the curse bound us to the wolf's form. The spell can only be broken by someone who has the warmth within them to ignite the flame that can unbind us. That warmth is something you hold inside of you." Jack shook his head, trying to make sense of the situation. "But I'm just a man. I don't have anything like that. I'm not special. I can't." "You are," the alpha interrupted, its voice surprisingly gentle. "You are special, Jack. You don't realize it yet, but you carry the light we need to free ourselves." The weight of the words settled heavily on his shoulders. How could this be true? Why, he was a writer. A recluse, someone who preferred the quiet and solitude of the woods to anything else. He had no powers, no special talents. Yet, standing there in front of the wolves, in the freezing cold of his cabin, he couldn't deny the weight of their words. Jack's mind raced, but he couldn't figure out what to do. The wolves were waiting, their eyes wide with an unspoken plea. They were depending on him. I'll do what I can," Jack stammered, his heart pounding. "But I don't know how to." The alpha wolf dipped its head, and for a moment, Jack thought he saw something resembling gratitude in its eyes. "You will find your way. You must." The wolf paused, as if considering its next words carefully. "But beware. The curse is not easily broken. and those who try to undo it often pay a heavy price. Jack nodded, his throat tight. He didn't understand, but he knew he couldn't leave them to suffer. He didn't have all the answers, but he couldn't walk away. The wolves needed him. They had chosen him for reasons he couldn't yet comprehend. With a deep breath, Jack turned to the fireplace. The flames were barely a flicker, nothing more than embers now, but he needed to reignite them. It was all he could think to do. He grabbed the fire starter from the side of the hearth and began carefully building the fire back up. As he did, he felt a strange warmth start to seep into his hands, the light from the flames seeming to pulse with an energy he had never felt before. The wolves watched him in silence, their eyes glowing brighter with every flicker of the fire. As the flames grew higher, the tension in the room seemed to shift. The cold began to recede, but Jack wasn't sure if it was the fire alone that was doing it. When the fire was fully blazing again, casting warm light across the room, Jack felt a sudden shift in the air. The wolves, their bodies still frozen and stiff, seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. "We thank you," the alpha wolf said softly, its voice now filled with a kind of quiet reverence. "But this is only the beginning. The curse cannot be lifted by fire alone. You must journey with us, Jack. There is more you must do." Jack turned slowly to face the alpha wolf, his heart racing. He didn't know what they meant or what he had gotten himself into. But one thing was certain, there was no going back now. And as he looked into the eyes of the wolves, he realized that his life would never be the same again. Jack staggered back, his mind struggling to grasp the weight of the alpha wolf's words. He had always thought of wolves as wild creatures, nothing more than part of the natural world, but hearing this, it was like the ground beneath him had shifted, and everything he knew about reality was crumbling. The temperature in the room was now unbearable. His breath came in visible clouds, and his skin began to prickle with cold, even though he was standing next to the fireplace. The embers that had been crackling only moments before now seemed to be extinguishing one by one, as if the flames themselves were being sucked into the oppressive chill that filled the cabin. What do you mean I'm bound to your fate?" Jack stammered, his voice thick with disbelief. He looked around, but the wolves, each one still eerily motionless, their eyes glowing faintly in the dim light, remained silent, watching him with unwavering intensity. The alpha wolf moved forward slowly, its steps graceful despite the stiffness of its body. It stopped just a few feet from Jack, its enormous form casting a long shadow across the cabin. There was a deep sadness in its eyes now, as if it understood the burden it was placing on him. "You've invited us in," the alpha continued, its voice soft but laced with a sorrowful edge. "In doing so, you've allowed our curse to take hold of you as well. The warmth you offered, the fire that brought us here, has become a part of you. The bond between us is now forged, Jack. You are no longer just a man in this cabin. You are tied to our fate, and the only way to free yourself is to help us break the curse that binds us to this endless winter." Jack's heart skipped a beat. He had known something was wrong from the moment the wolves had arrived, but this was beyond anything he could have imagined. His mind raced, trying to make sense of the supernatural force he was now entangled in. How could this be possible? How could helping them, bringing them into his home, lead to this fate? "The curse, it's been with you for how long?" Jack asked, his voice strained. The alpha wolf's eyes darkened. "For centuries. We were once men living in a world much like yours. But we sought power, immortality. We made a pact with forces beyond our understanding, thinking we could gain the strength to rule, to transcend mortality. But the price we paid was steep." The wolf's gaze flickered toward the other wolves who stood silent in their circle. Their eyes glowed faintly in the dim cabin light, a reflection of the pain and suffering that had etched itself into their very beings. "We were transformed into wolves, cursed to live in the cold for eternity, our human form stripped away. Every time we find someone willing to help us, we are given a brief moment of warmth, a chance to survive a little longer. But it is never enough. The curse always drags us back into the winter, always colder, always more unbearable. The warmth you gave us, the life you offered, it is the only reason we are still here, still alive." Jack swallowed hard. "So you're telling me if I don't help you I'll become like you? Trapped, cursed, wandering forever in the cold?" The alpha wolf's eyes glinted with something like regret. Yes. The curse is not one you can escape easily. You've brought us warmth, and in doing so, you've given us the hope we need to break free. But the curse is strong, and there are forces at work that will stop at nothing to keep us bound to this fate. Jack was silent for a long moment, his mind churning with the weight of everything he had just learned. This was far beyond what he had expected when he first decided to live alone in the woods. What had started as a quiet retreat from the chaos of life had now become a nightmarish reality he could not escape. So, what exactly do I need to do? Jack asked, his voice quiet but filled with determination. He had no idea what he was about to step into, but he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't turn back now. The alpha wolf's eyes softened as it regarded Jack. You must find the source of the curse, the dark force that binds us to this eternal winter. It is a malevolent presence, ancient and powerful. It is the reason we remain trapped in these frozen bodies, unable to break free. Jack nodded slowly, trying to steady his racing heart. How do I find this force? This presence? You must journey deep into the heart of the forest, the alpha said, its voice steady, despite the pain that lingered in its eyes. There is an old temple hidden within the mountains. It is the place where the pact was made long ago, and it is where the curse began. If you can reach it, you may be able to break the spell, to free us from the winter that has claimed our lives. Jack shivered, though not from the cold. The idea of traveling deep into the forest, into a place he had never heard of, a place filled with unknown dangers, he wasn't sure if he was ready for something like that. But he had no choice. The wolves were counting on him. And so he nodded once more. I'll do it, Jack said, his voice firm despite the fear gnawing at him. I'll go to the temple. I'll find a way to break this curse. The alpha wolf gave a slow nod, its eyes grateful but tinged with sorrow. You must be careful, Jack. The path will not be easy. The forces that cursed us will do everything in their power to stop you. They will try to keep you from reaching the temple. You will need all your strength, all your will to succeed. Jack's mind was already racing with the thought of what lay ahead. A journey through the forest into unknown and dangerous territory, to find a temple that might hold the key to breaking the curse. But he also knew that there was no turning back. He had already made the decision to help the wolves. And now he had to see it through. How will I know what to do when I get to this temple? Jack asked, his voice quieter now, filled with uncertainty. The alpha wolf's gaze never wavered. You will know. The answer will come to you when the time is right. Trust yourself, Jack. And trust that you are the one who can end this curse. With those final words, the alpha wolf turned away and began to walk toward the other wolves, who had remained still and silent throughout the conversation. The pack was ready to follow Jack, though they would remain in their wolf forms until the curse was lifted. Jack stood there, frozen in place, the weight of the situation settling heavily on his shoulders. His fate was no longer his own. He was bound to the wolves, to their curse, to their desperate need for salvation. The fire in the hearth was now nothing more than a faint glow, but Jack felt a strange warmth inside him, a small ember of hope. He had to do this. He had no other choice. And so, as the wolves huddled together in the cold cabin, Jack prepared himself for the journey that would take him into the heart of the forest, into the unknown, and into a destiny he could never have imagined. The terrifying truth had been revealed. Now all he could do was face it head-on. Jack stood there, his breath shallow and erratic, a freezing mist forming in the air as his mind tried to process the horrifying weight of the alpha wolf's words. A sacrifice. His life, his soul, his humanity. The very essence of who he was would be ripped from him, consumed by the ritual needed to break the curse. His body shivered involuntarily, not from the cold of the room, but from the sinking realization that this was his only option. The wolves, once men cursed by their own greed, were looking at him now with eyes full of sorrow but also hope. He was their salvation. They needed him just as he had come to realize he needed them. Despite everything, Jack knew he could not walk away. The connection between them had already been forged. He had no choice but to see it through. The alpha wolf, standing in front of him, lowered its head slightly, its cold blue eyes never leaving Jack's face. The sorrow in those eyes was undeniable, the weight of centuries of torment pressing into Jack's chest. "We cannot do this alone," the wolf said softly, its voice hoarse. "We need you, man. Your warmth, your humanity. Only together can we end this suffering. If you refuse, you will join us, and you will be trapped in this form, in this cold, forever." Jack's throat tightened. He could feel the tears welling in his eyes. Not from fear but from the heartbreak of it all. The wolves, these creatures who had once been human, who had made a pact with forces too dark to understand, had been suffering for so long. They were trapped in bodies not their own, doomed to roam the earth until someone was willing to make the ultimate sacrifice to free them. And now that someone was him. Jack glanced at the pack, each of the wolves standing in a silent, sorrowful line. Their once proud forms were now hunched and broken, their fur matted with ice, their eyes hollow from centuries of pain. They had lived through this cold nightmare for so long, and now they were begging him to help them find release. "What do I have to do?" Jack asked quietly, his voice shaking barely above a whisper. He was terrified, but there was no way out. He could feel it in his bones. There was nothing he could do to turn away from this. The alpha wolf stepped forward, its large form moving gracefully despite the stiffness in its movements. The eyes of the other wolves followed its every move, still and waiting. The cabin was deathly silent now, the only sound the creaking of the old wooden floor beneath Jack's boots. "There is a ritual," the alpha wolf said, its voice low and filled with regret. "A dark one. A sacrifice. You must give up everything you are to free us. Your life, your soul, your humanity. We need your warmth, the very essence of who you are. Only by offering all of yourself can the curse be broken, and we can be freed." Jack's heart sank, his thoughts swirling in confusion and horror. The idea of giving up his entire being, of losing himself forever, seemed unimaginable. The weight of the decision was overwhelming, and he felt like he was suffocating under the pressure. His life, everything he had built, his identity, all of it would be consumed by this ritual. He would no longer be Jack. He would cease to exist as a human being. "And if I don't?" Jack managed to croak out, his throat dry, his stomach twisting into knots. The alpha wolf's gaze grew hard, its eyes dark with the gravity of the situation. "Then you will join us. You will become one of us, frozen, trapped in this eternal winter, bound to the curse. You will wander forever in a form you do not recognize. The cold will consume you and you will never know peace again." Jack recoiled as the full weight of the words hit him. He would never again feel the warmth of the sun on his face. He would never again know the joy of human connection, of companionship. If he didn't help, he would be lost forever in a world of ice and darkness. There was no coming back from that. He turned toward the fire, which had long since died out, the hearth now cold and lifeless. The flames had been the only thing keeping the cabin from becoming a tomb. And now, even the warmth of his cabin, the one place he had hoped would protect him, was slipping away. Jack's mind raced, but in the end he knew there was no other way. The wolves needed him. He had been chosen. The warmth he had given them when they first arrived, the warmth of his home, his soul, his compassion, had forged a bond between them, one that could not be broken. But the cost was so much higher than he had ever imagined. With a shaky breath, Jack looked back at the wolves, his voice trembling but steady. "I'll do it," he whispered, his heart breaking with the decision. "I'll help you. I'll break the curse." The moment the words left his lips, a strange stillness fell over the room. The wolves, who had been frozen in their grief and desperation, seemed to relax ever so slightly. The tension in the air lessened, but the weight of the ritual still hung heavy, suffocating. The alpha wolf nodded slowly, its eyes filled with something Jack couldn't quite place. Gratitude, sorrow, perhaps even relief. But underneath that, there was a lingering sadness, a deep regret that Jack knew he would never fully understand. The wolf had no choice but to ask for this sacrifice, just as Jack had no choice but to offer it. The pack began to move in a slow, deliberate circle around Jack, their forms flickering in and out of focus as the air grew colder still. The temperature in the room dropped sharply, the cold seeping into Jack's bones as if the ritual was beginning, taking hold of him. His body trembled uncontrollably, and the frost on the walls seemed to inch forward, creeping across the cabin's floor like a living thing. The alpha wolf stepped forward once more, its eyes locking with Jack's. The ritual was about to begin and there was no turning back. "You must surrender yourself fully," the alpha said, its voice low and reverent. "The warmth within you, the humanity that keeps you tethered to this world, must be offered freely. Only then can the curse be broken." Jack nodded, his eyes locked on the alpha wolf's gaze. "I understand." The other wolves stepped closer, their eyes glowing in the dim light, their bodies shimmering with the cold. As the alpha wolf raised its head, a low growl rumbled in its chest. The ritual had begun. Jack felt the cold begin to invade him, creeping through his veins, freezing his very blood. The wolves circled him, their forms shifting as if they were becoming more than wolves, something darker, something older. The air around him grew thick with the magic of the curse, and Jack's body began to freeze in place, his limbs stiffening as if the cold was consuming him from the inside out. But even as the chill spread through him, Jack felt a strange warmth in his chest, a fire that had not gone out despite everything. It was the warmth of his own humanity, his compassion, his willingness to sacrifice everything for these cursed souls. He focused on that warmth, holding on to it with every ounce of his being. Then, with a sudden burst of energy, the wolves howled together in unison, their voices echoing through the cabin, rising in pitch until they became a deafening roar. The sound seemed to shake the very foundation of the cabin, and Jack's heart pounded in his chest. He could feel the magic swirling around him, wrapping itself around his soul. As the last note of the howl echoed into the night, the world seemed to stop. The cold was gone. Jack opened his eyes. The wolves were no longer around him, their forms dissipating like mist. The cabin was warm again, the hearth glowing brightly, the flames crackling in the fireplace. And yet, Jack knew that something had changed. Something deep within him had shifted, and he no longer felt fully human. He stood there, trembling as the realization set in. The wolves were free. They had been released from their curse, their true forms returning. But Jack had paid the ultimate price. His last thought before the cold completely overtook him was that he had saved them. He had broken their curse. But at what price? As the final shards of his humanity were consumed by the ritual, Jack became one with the wolves. His form shifted, first sprouting, his body growing larger, stronger, colder. He could feel the ancient magic that had once bound the wolves now binding him, transforming him into something beyond human. The choice had been made. Jack had saved the wolves, but now he was one of them, forever frozen in the cold.